regular season. This coming after pleading guilty to 2 third-degree felony charges involving a serious bodily injury and racing on a highway causing bodily injury. Rice will be eligible to return for the Chiefs in Week 7 of the season. Here with national reporter Jeff Darlington, analyst Louis Riddick, I'm Phil Murphy. Jeff, what more can you tell us about the league's decision here?
Well, Phil, we know the seriousness of the nature of Rashee Rice's situation. He was sentenced to 30 days in jail, which a sentence that he can take whenever he chooses per the judge's orders. Now the NFL essentially saying 6-game suspension. What is so interesting about this timing is that originally we did not anticipate this suspension starting at the week 1 of the regular season. His disciplinary hearing was not scheduled until September 30th. So the thought was after that they would come down with their ruling and perhaps he would serve that suspension later on. The NFL and the NFLPA instead coming to terms on a suspension that Rice did accept. So it will be 6 games at the start of the season. The Chiefs will have to figure it out without Rashee Rice for what feels like the first half of the season.
Louis, from a schematic standpoint, we've seen this Chiefs offense start slow in recent seasons. We knew a decision was coming for Rice. Now we know 6 games. What's your level of concern for the function of this offense while he's out?
Yeah, look, it's a big hit because Rashee is a multi-tool player, meaning he can line up at all 3 wide receiver spots. He can line up at the X, he can line up at the Z, he can line up at the E in the slot. And so that is a big component that they're going to wind up missing. But look, I think obviously Brett Veach understood that at some point during this season he was not going to have him. And so he had to go out and make sure that this wide receiver core was able to carry the load for however long he was going to be missed. And that means, look, Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown are going to have to really step up. Xavier is going to have to take another step in his development. Hopefully Hollywood can stay healthy. And he is a guy who can be an absolute game breaker. And then Tyquan Thornton's emergence this preseason, that's another big part of it. Brashard Smith catching balls out of the backfield. These guys are going to have to be big right out of the gate because, look, they got some heavyweights right out of the gate. The Chargers are a serious contender, I believe, this year. The Philadelphia Eagles, we already know what they bring to the table. So these guys are going to have to lean on Patrick Mahomes. Patrick's going to have to lean on them. And just remember this name, too. Travis Kelce is going to have to step up right out of the gate and say, hey, look, I need to really carry the load here and set the tone. I'm a future Hall of Famer. I didn't have a great season in 24. I want to set the tone right. And what better way to do it, Jeff, right? I mean, when you're talking about the fact that he has to step in for the fact that Rashee Rice is not going to be there. They have the wherewithal to do it. Right. They have the coaching staff to be able to make up for it.
Yeah, not to diminish the 6-game suspension. The only thing I would add to that is that from the Chiefs' perspective, when you talk about personnel, they'd rather have these guys available at the end of the season than the beginning of the season like they did last year. They want to make sure that they've got everything set. So in a weird way, I hate talking about these suspensions and setting aside, obviously, the seriousness of the nature that led to the suspension, but just talking about the suspension itself, the Chiefs can look at this as a positive because they don't have to wait in limbo for that September 30th arbitration hearing. They can now get this out of the way for a team that will find a way to stack up enough wins to get themselves into the playoffs. And then the key for this team, like they didn't have enough time to kind of get cohesion with Hollywood Brown last year. They didn't have Rashee Rice for as long as they might have wanted. So they can now get all of these guys available at the end of the season, get themselves primed for a playoff run.
Louis, let's say it takes a minute or a few weeks for this offense to find its footing again. This defense allowed a league best 18.2 points per game the last 2 years. Yeah. 2025, is it good enough to carry them again?
Absolutely it is. Look, I think this football team, I've said this all along, this football team may not win as many games as they won a year ago. I mean, look, they only lost 1. Yeah. But I think they are better in 2025 for sure from a personnel perspective, 1 through 53. Defense, look, they've got young playmakers at all 3 levels. Brett Veach has done a fantastic job of drafting, and Steve Spagnuolo, the head of the defensive charge, has done a nice job, a fantastic job developing them. So think about it this year. They add a guy like Aston Gelati out of Louisville to go on this defensive line along with Chris Jones, and there you see George Karlaftis on your screen. They are super high on Aston Gelati. And then think about, now a new safety, Jaden Hicks, who's been there a couple years now in this system, and now he is ready to break onto the scene. Trent McDuffie is already a stud. Nick Bolton is already a stud. They are loaded And I think this team, without a doubt, is built to withstand the kind of loss they're going to suffer with Rashee not being available early on.
The Chiefs being better is a scary proposition. They allowed just 20 points 4 times all of last year in the regular season when their starters played. We're not counting Week 18 against the Broncos. Other receiving news, 2025, starting to feel like 2015 with some of these homecomings. Back to Skull. The Panthers traded Adam Thielen to the Vikings back up north where it all started for him. He was an undrafted free agent out of Minnesota State. And you see 22-year-old J.J. McCarthy gets another efficient wide receiver, highest receiving percentage by receiver amongst the last 2 seasons, 150 targets. Thielen's one, and then it's royalty. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, Jamar Chase. Jeff, the Vikings lost Rondale Moore, a free agency acquisition in the preseason. We know they don't have Jordan Addison for the first few games. How important was it for Minnesota to add some depth to this receiving room?
Yeah, I mean, they're banged up across the board. Even Justin Jefferson dealing with a little bit of an ailment. Now, he'll be fine, but ultimately they had to find depth at the wide receiver position. Adam Thielen was a guy that there's been chatter behind the scenes that they were targeting for a trade. No one really necessarily, I think, expected it to happen. Or if you didn't expect it to happen, it's because you didn't think Carolina would be willing to give up the guy who's made Bryce Young as comfortable as he's been the last year. So I think that might have been the biggest mystery of this, but no question about it. It made perfect sense for the Vikings, not just because Adam Thielen is comfortable in Minnesota where he started his career, but also simply because he's the kind of veteran presence that will be very good for J.J. McCarthy when he does need this depth as a rookie starter.
Lewis, a sensible move. How much does this move help Minnesota this season?
Oh, it helps him tremendously simply because of what Jeff was alluding to. The fact that, one, he brings a veteran presence to the wide receiver room. He brings a veteran presence to the offensive meeting room. And specifically, he is someone that, along with Justin Jefferson, can go to J.J. McCarthy and really keep him on the straight and narrow and keep him nice and even-keeled, although I don't think J.J. McCarthy has any problem with that. And J.J. has a previous relationship with Adam Thielen already. So this is brilliant on the part of the front office of the Minnesota Vikings and Kevin O'Connell. This is exactly the kind of addition that they need, especially given the fact that Jordan Addison isn't going to be available at the beginning of the year. I think it just makes sense. I am all for making sure that you mix and match within different positional rooms in terms of veterans and young guys, because young guys need that leadership. Obviously, you don't want a bunch of exceptions, meaning older guys who are on the downside of their career, but you want to hit the sweet spot. And I think Adam Thielen going to Minnesota is one of those examples of hitting the sweet spot.
And his second stint in purple and gold starts right here on ESPN, Week 1, Monday Night Football in Chicago. Other side of the coin, this is a big loss for Bryce Young, who looked great toward the end of last season. Young had a 95 QBR when targeting Thielen. Compare that to just 31 when targeting any other wide receiver. Young also threw for nearly 3 more yards per attempt and had a 20% better completion percentage when targeting the 35-year-old Thielen. Lewis, end of last year, Young was terrific. 10 total touchdowns, no turnovers the last 3 games. Now you subtract the main target. How do you grade the talent around Young in Carolina as he tries to make the next step?
Like, obviously, it's young and unproven, but you know what? They're trying to go young. They're trying to build for the long haul, and what better way to do it than to get a bunch of guys who are around the same age and just let them grow together. Now, you have to understand that there's going to be some lumps along the way because you have some inexperience, particular at the wide receiver spot, and you have to take your time. And you see there on your screen, look, Teteroa McMillan, Xavier Legette, Jalen Carter, Jimmy Horn Jr., these guys are all going to have to grow along with Bryce, earn his trust. Bryce is going to have to get to know them, but they're all super skilled. Look at some of the highlights on your screen right now. I mean, Xavier Legette can fly, and he is a monster of an athlete. Teteroa McMillan is one of those high risers down the field that can make Lynn Swann-type catches with one hand, contort his body in the air. These are kind of things that you're looking for as a scouting department and as a coaching staff. They just need to grow together now, and you need to manage your expectations accordingly.
Yeah, I don't want to say anything bad about Dan Morgan, the GM, making these calls because he is smarter than me and will beat me up. But that being said, It is slightly peculiar to me just because Adam Thielen was such a safety net for Bryce Young. And that's not to take away what Young did last season. And I do applaud the idea of going young. They've drafted 2 wide receivers in the first round each of the last 2 years. It just feels like maybe they could have gone another year with that veteran presence in Adam Thielen. But they got some trade value out of it. They feel obviously very good about these young guys. They want to move forward with them. And I will say this, it obviously speaks volumes not just to how they feel about those young receivers, but how they feel about Bryce Young. That it is no fluke by any means that he rebounded after being benched for Andy Dalton and came back and resurrected his young career. Very clearly, this team believes that he has proven himself not only to be the franchise quarterback, to be able to raise the standard of these young wide receivers.
Carolina's probably going to need to put up points. They ranked last season in yards allowed, points allowed, QBR allowed, and third down percentage against. Let's get to some more top stories today, Jeff. Starting in Baltimore, we got a new $100 million man on that Ravens roster. What more can you tell us?
That's right, we do. Kyle Hamilton setting a record-setting 4-year extension. It's $100.4 million, including $82 million guaranteed. Eric DeCosta, the general manager there, really has a lot of players coming up for extensions, deciding to get Hamilton done very early. Entering his 4th seasons, we see what happens with a guy like Micah Parsons when you let that roll too long. Baltimore Ravens say, no, we're getting this one done right now. We're getting it done very, very early. Let's go to Joe Mixon, out at least the first 4 games of this season. Non-football injury list for an injury that he sustained away from the football field earlier this offseason. So as a result, it looks like Nick Chubb is going to get his chance to resurrect his career. I think we're going to see Chubb as RB1 in Houston as Mixon comes back. The question is, how long will Mixon be gone? Will he be able to come back right after those mandatory 4 games that he'll be missing? Devon Achane, some good news for the Dolphins. He's been dealing with a calf injury in recent weeks, but general manager Chris Grier did say on Wednesday that Achane will be ready to go for the Week 1 game against the Colts. This is very important given the fact that Achane hadn't really practiced very much the past few weeks, didn't practice because of that injured calf. Leading into the final preseason game, but Achane should be ready for Week 1. Huge news for the Dolphins backfield.
Yeah, we are just getting started here on NFL Live. The Bengals locked in Trey Hendrickson and handled out a few big deals this offseason, but is paying their stars enough to get back to a Super Bowl? Find out what Lewis thinks next. And on the other side, the Cowboys and Micah Parsons remain at a standoff. With Week 1 fast approaching, will Micah even play in Week 1 if a deal's done? Someone here says that is a must. NFL Live is brought to you by Popeye.
Marchese remains sitting out of practice.
The Bengals and Trey Hendrickson will see if the two sides can figure out a way to get a deal done.
I'm highly concerned.
I didn't think it was going to get this far.
Joe Burrow publicly lobbying to keep everybody together.
They are not going to move. I don't know how this gets resolved.
The Bengals finally found a way to do it.
They very much wanted this to be a package deal.
A $14 million raise.
Now at least it feels like you're going in with a full deck of cards.
I'm thankful that we were able to get some really big deals done with some of the best players on planet Earth.
It was a busy offseason for that Bengals front office since he locked down both top receivers for the next 4 years. Jamar Chase becoming the highest paid non-QB in league history, and T. Higgins got $115 million US. They also signed B.J. Hill, Mike Gesicki to 3-year deals. Then Monday, finally, resolution for Trey Hendrickson, raising his 2025 salary to $30 million this season, and the reigning sack leader spoke today for the first time since that new deal.
I'm a football player, and football players play football. So, it's good to be back out there with the guys. Not that I didn't enjoy coaching, but that's not what I'm here to do. Looking forward to getting after quarterbacks. The priority was always the 2025 Bengals, whatever this looked like. Unfortunately for me, I can't write my own contracts. That's something that we had, common ground in finding it, and that's what we're doing now, and that's what's best for the 2025 Bengals. I think is just to suit up and play, and incredibly humbled by the experience.
Jeff Darlington back with us. Jeff, it was a league best 17.5 sacks last season for Hendrickson. That accounted for 49% of the team total. At the start of this offseason, a lot of people were worried Cincinnati wouldn't get this deal done. How did it come together?
Well, it came together by complete compromise. We talk about the idea of it being a long-term extension. Well, it's not. It's essentially a one-year rental to allow Hendrickson to eventually perhaps hit free agency. The Bengals were always uncomfortable with the idea of overpaying given the fact that Hendrickson is coming up on his 30th birthday. So instead, they will have him for this season, like Joe Burrow had wanted, to help out a defense that clearly does need Hendrickson's presence, but also still able to do those big deals on the offensive side of the ball. So it's not as if this is the perfect scenario where they have Hendrickson in the long-term fold, but they at least can go into this season knowing that they've got their leading sack guy. They also have the offensive firepower to get it going there. So perhaps a short-term resolution, but one at least that gets them through the 2025 season.
Louis Riddick subbing back on. Louis, Hendrickson got paid, but this defense was bad in stretches with him last year. They bring in a new DC, Al Golden. How much will he improve this defense that, frankly, needs to carry its load?
Look, it's going to be all dependent upon how he can get these young players, how fast he can get them to develop, how fast he can get them to follow Trey Hendrickson's lead. You know, when you're talking about guys like Shamar Stewart, like Demetrius Knight Jr., like Barrett Carter, the first, second, and fourth round pick, respectively, this year, all of these guys have tried to tap into Trey Hendrickson and kind of learn how to be a professional, tricks of the trade, so they can hit the ground running. Because, look, they know on the defensive side that they're the ones, quite honestly, that are the weak links right now. They know that Joe Burrow is putting up yardage at an absolute Hall of Fame rate, that Jamar Chase is Triple Crown winning, leading in receptions, receiving yards and touchdowns, and they're sitting there on the other side of the ball, dropping the ball over and over again. So now it's going to be up to Al Golden to get these guys really up to speed. It's up to the personnel department, considering how top-heavy they are from a salary cap perspective on the offensive side of the ball, to say, hey, look, we have to make sure we're identifying the right kind of guys from a football character, personal character, skills specifics, to make sure that if we're going young on that side of the ball and really building primarily through the draft, that we're giving our coaching staff the right kind of guys. So far, it hasn't really worked out. So that's what they need to really start hitting on in order for them to kind of get back to where they want to get to.
And, Louis, to underscore your point, since sacks became official more than, 40 years ago, the Bengals are the only team to have the league leader in touchdown passes, touchdown catches, and sacks, yet they went 9-8 and still missed the playoffs. Speaking of that touchdown pass leader, Joe Burrow showed little concern he can maintain the MVP caliber numbers he put up, frankly, in vain last season. In a recent Sports Illustrated feature, he said, quote, "I'm not sure I would say anyone's playing the position better than I am right now. I'm pretty confident in my ability to go out and do that every Sunday. Now it's just showing that consistency, showing it year in, year out. I think what separates the legends is being able to do it year in, year out for 5-10 years at a time." Louis, this is a guy, Burrow, who had 21 touchdowns to 3 picks in games that Cincinnati lost. How much pressure is on him to maintain that level in 2025?
Look, Joe knows what he has to do. He knows, what the task calls for, what the job calls for. And another thing about the fact that, like, the way in which this young man is playing and has played since he was drafted by Cincinnati, he's doing it behind an offensive line that has been like Swiss cheese. It's been like a sieve. I mean, they have been in the bottom quarter of the league in pass block win rate every year he's been there. So he's taking a beating and still being able to be damn near perfect and getting the ball where it needs to get to. And that's why he has every right to say, hey, look, I played the game right now. I don't see anybody playing the game better than me right now. And he's right. And like I said, he knows what he has to do. He's just hoping, I'm sure, just like everyone else in Cincinnati and anyone else nationally who's a Bengals fan, that they can just become average, just top 16, just in the top half of the league or just outside of it on defense in whatever metric you want to use, because they're not really good at any of them.
Well, a metric where Burrow, again, underscored how impressive he was in vain. Third QB to miss the playoffs while throwing at least 40 touchdown passes, and the first to do so since the most recent playoff expansion. 3 of those touchdowns came against the Cowboys on Monday Night Football. Dallas's star, Micah Parsons, remains without a contract extension with the season opener 8 days away. New head coach Brian Schottenheimer addressed Parsons' availability for Week 1.
At the end of the day, as soon as he can get out there, that's great. But again, there'll be a ramp-up plan for him. And, when he lines up out there to play, do I think he would play 75 plays in every play? Probably not. I don't think that that's real. But I do think that he can be very disruptive, like we all know. But the best way to get good at football is to play football. And so I would say as soon as possible would be the desired effect.
Jeff, what more can you tell us about what's going on in Dallas with a not insignificant division game 8 days away?
Yeah. Well, very little is happening at this hour. That being said, it does still feel like I don't want to give any kind of false optimism, but there is still this weird sense when I talk to people in Dallas that they feel like there's still a chance that this gets done. I don't know how that happens. I don't know when it happens, but I will say that they have not given up hope that they can get a deal done that gets Micah Parsons back on the field. That said, as Jerry Jones has postured throughout, he expects Micah Parsons to line up even if he does not have the extension done for the Cowboys. He has continuously said he's not going to trade him, that Parsons will play in this game. But what Schottenheimer, by the way, is saying here is very simply that he has not had enough time to get into football shape to be expected to play in that game. And I know Lou knows this better than I do, but I have heard from coaches for years say that their biggest fear with a player not getting enough reps in training camp is soft tissue injuries. And the biggest fear that the Cowboys have right now would be to put Parsons out there and potentially experience something like that.
Yeah, it's something we talked about all offseason, Jeff, right? I mean, we were talking about it with Trey Hendrickson. We've talked about it with him. We talked about it with Terry McLaurin, in particular because of the fact that he plays a position that requires so much running. The only thing I'll say is this, though, okay? There is a guy out there in the past decade that missed 2 training camps and still went on to be the baddest dude in the NFL, that being Aaron Donald. Think back to 2018. He misses the entire training camp. He signs, basically the day after the last preseason game, and signs the richest contract in history for a non-quarterback, and then goes out and has 20 sacks and leads his team to a Super Bowl. It can be done. I wouldn't want to play this game of roulette with a guy, with a fine-tuned athlete like Micah Parsons, and risk that soft tissue injury. There is going to need to be a ramp-up period. And look, all that's a given. The thing that's interesting to me about, this optimism down in Dallas about potentially this getting done, does that mean, in terms of Micah being on the football field for week 1, does that mean he's playing under his original deal? Is he going to play under his 5th-year option? And then they have, the 2 franchise tags that they could use on him the next 2 years? Or is an actual deal going to get done? Are they banking on Micah saying, hey, look, I'm not missing out on $24 million. I can't ever replace that money. I'm going to take the money if they're going to make me do it. It's a terrible situation for all involved. It's just terrible. I can't even believe that we're still talking about this.
Well, Lewis, it's kind of unfair to compare anybody to Aaron Donald. You Pitt Panthers are built a little differently. Jeff was talking about perhaps injury concern. I didn't mean to inflate the ego as much as I did. The team the Cowboys face in that season opener, some good news on the injury front. That, according to our Eagles reporter, Tim McManus, reporting that A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and parenthetically, somehow, Landon Dickerson all participated in practice today, again with the season opener in exactly 8 days. But who's counting? We are here at NFL Live. Coming up on NFL Live, with Rashee Rice suspended 6 games, the Chiefs face early tests plural, but why could his absence actually help others on the offense grow? We've got a live report from Kansas City on the other side.
Well, a lot of receiver news. The most important one right now, Rashee Rice has accepted a suspension of 6 games to start the season. It will begin in week 1. This a result of a personal conduct violation stemming from 2 felony counts that he ended up being sentenced for 30 days of jail. He'll eventually serve that sentence, but for now, a 6-game suspension for Rashee Rice. Chris Godwin, some good news for the Bucs. He did pass his physical. He has been removed from the physically unable to perform list. Him, by the way, and Tristan Wirfs, making them eligible to return to practice, potentially play in week 1 against the Falcons. The team is optimistic at this point. We'll see if Godwin can get back on the field for that week 1 game. And more wide receiver news. The banged-up 49ers wide receivers group getting a little bit of help in Marquez Valdes-Scantling. He was cut a day earlier by the Seattle Seahawks, so now MVS landing with the 49ers, a team, by the way, that only has 2 healthy wide receivers in Ricky Pearsall and Sky Moore. So MVS has the chance to step in right away and make an impact for his new team. Now let's get away from those wide receivers. We can talk about some defense for once. Kyle Hamilton agreeing to a monster extension. He'll get $100.4 million over 4 years. The Ravens making the decision to do this ahead of his 4th season. So they are getting ahead of this one. They know they love Hamilton. They don't want to wait around. They're getting this deal done. We know that Eric DeCosta has a lot of deals to do in Baltimore, this being the first domino to fall among those transactions.
Yeah, Ravens GM Eric DeCosta had a busy offseason making sure Baltimore took care of its own. Beyond Hamilton, Derrick Henry, Ronnie Stanley, Rashad Bateman all got raises. Now you got Lamar Jackson and Tyler Linderbaum, current candidates for new deals. DeCosta spoke today on the team's philosophy on keeping their championship window open.
I hate that idea of just a closed window. Being a GM on a closed window team gives me anxiety, and I don't want to be that GM. We're probably going to have to kind of recalibrate and say we got to nail these draft picks. And we need these younger players to really be good because we can't sign every single guy back. It is a challenge, and it does, keep me awake at night. I feel really, really good about this team, but I want to feel as good about the 2027 team and the 2030 team as I feel about this team.
Jeff, every GM says it. Not many can do it at DeCosta's level. He's been with this franchise since 1996. How has he been able to keep this Super Bowl window ajar?
Well, smart decisions in addition to those long-term extensions of keeping guys around. We saw it with Derrick Henry. They needed some way to add some offensive firepower last year, so they went out and did that. That's not necessarily DeCosta's recipe for success. He does, as he mentioned, believe in keeping the talent that he drafts, but he's also willing to plug and play with different stars. And he did that last year. And seemingly, by the way, I know we talk about the Ravens not being able to get over the hump of the Super Bowl, but from a roster construction standpoint, it does at the very least feel like this is a championship caliber roster year in and year out. Now DeCosta hoping that eventually they can get over that hump.
Draft and develop, it's what they do in Baltimore. 61% of Ravens players from the 2024 season were drafted by Baltimore. That's the highest percentage in the NFL. Next on NFL Live, it didn't quite go as planned for C.J. Stroud and the Texans last season heading into year 3. Are there enough pieces around Stroud to bounce back? Lewis is not concerned. Hear why. Next, receiver Rashee Rice has been suspended 6 games for violating the NFL's personal conduct policy, that according to Adam Schefter. The suspension follows Rice's guilty plea to 2 third-degree felony charges related to a March 2024 car crash in his native Dallas. For more on this story, we welcome in Chiefs reporter Nate Taylor from Arrowhead. Nate, this decision voids what was a scheduled hearing for Rice at the end of September. What made Rice agree to the suspension now?
The reason why Rashee Rice agreed to it now is because he got mostly what he was looking for, the ability to do the suspension at the start of the season, and for the fact that it's not 8 games, 10 games, initially what the NFL was hoping to get before having to schedule that disciplinary hearing in New York City on September 30th. Now, for Rashee, another reason why he chose to accept the suspension today is he's still coming off a knee injury, right? And so this still gives him 6 more weeks to prepare his body to play NFL games. And for the Chiefs specifically, it now gives them an understanding of what they're going to be having to do the first 6 weeks of the season without their number 1 receiver. Most notably, that involves Patrick Mahomes, of course, Andy Reid, the head coach, and Matt Nagy, the offensive coordinator. So although it's a 6-week suspension, still a third of the year, for Rashee Rice, he understands that he will be playing the most important games for the Chiefs moving forward once his suspension clears, and he can sort of move forward into the next chapter of his NFL career.
Yeah, Rice was injured late September last year against the Chargers. Coincidentally, that's the season opener amongst the games he'll miss. Nate, that's in Sao Paulo in 9 days. Without Rice, what's Kansas City saying they'll do to adjust their game plan ahead of Week 1?
Yeah, one of the more interesting things that we learned a few days ago is that Matt Nagy said the Chiefs had 2 plans for their offense, right? One that involved Rashee Rice on day 1 and one that didn't involve him. Now we know the Chiefs are operating in option B. And so what that means is Patrick Mahomes is going to have to obviously trust his new offensive line, most notably Josh Simmons at left tackle, Kizzy Suamataia at left guard, and that means that involves having a more balanced approach, right? Rashee Rice was going to be the Chiefs and might still be the Chiefs' most talented, most targeted receiver in the regular season, but he's going to have to use new receivers like Tyquan Thornton. He still has Juju Smith-Schuster. They're going to have to hit the deep ball with Xavier Worthy, the fastest man on the team. And, of course, now because you don't have Rashee Rice, it now means that in 3rd and long, Patrick Mahomes might still be looking for Travis Kelce, where he would normally give a look to maybe Rashee Rice. So although you don't have their best receiver, the Chiefs still feel confident they have a collection of talented skill makers around them. And it really comes down to Mahomes feeling comfortable in Sao Paulo because of the new offensive line and because everyone else on the roster is healthy going into week 1.
Yeah, personally intrigued to see how they utilize that speed with just Thornton and Worthy. Those two guys can fly. Rice's first game eligible to be back October 19th at home at that stadium against the Raiders. Nate, thank you. New on NFL Live, Colts GM Chris Ballard today on Anthony Richards' future with the team.
It's easy to say, okay, he's done, and I don't agree. I've said this numerous times. I do not agree with that. I think overcoming challenges and obstacles along the way are good for anybody. I do. I'm proud of Anthony, of where he's at, how far he's come. He's come miles. There's a lot of value in sitting behind a guy that's a professional and watching and learning and growing and working on the things you need to work on without the same pressure of being the starter.
Lewis, GM Chris Ballard has been candid through this whole process. Richardson just 23. Do you think the QB's time in Indy is done?
Yeah, I do. You know, because look, you don't draft a guy 4th overall and then have him have an open competition with a guy who also was a high first-round draft pick and wasn't able to cut it at the original team that he was drafted by, that being Daniel Jones in New York, and then just say, well, you know what, it's beneficial to him to sit behind Daniel Jones and learn how to be, you heard the word they used, professional. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, what do you mean learn how to be professional? He was drafted 4th overall. You knew that there were going to be some bumps in the road. This will be an interesting one. Look, I still believe in the kid. I just don't think it's going to happen in Indianapolis, but we'll see.
Time to read and react to more news around the NFL, starting in New Orleans, where the Saints